Berlin, May 1945, 3 in the morning, an 11-year-old boy named Heinrich digs through rubble near Potsdamer Platz when he hears something that shouldn't exist. English. American English. He finds Staff Sergeant James Morrison pinned under a collapsed building, semiconscious, bleeding from his leg, holding out metal dog tags like they're worth more than gold. The boy hasn't eaten in 4 days. Morrison whispers one thing. Checkpoint Baker, 3 blocks. Heinrich makes a choice that defies every survival instinct. He drags a 180-pound stranger through Soviet-controlled streets while patrols pass within 20 feet. By dawn, the checkpoint is gone. The soldier is unconscious. The tags are in Heinrich's hand. What the starving boy did next would save 2 lives and create a bond that newspapers would get backwards for decades. But first, he had to survive the next 6 hours in a city where helping an American could get you executed. The city was dying in slow motion. By late April 1945, Berlin had become a graveyard with a pulse. Soviet artillery pounding from the east, American forces holding positions to the west, and in between, a civilian population reduced to shadows. Heinrich had learned the rules fast: move at night, trust no one, eat anything that won't kill you immediately. His parents were gone, killed in an Allied bombing raid 2 months earlier, a fact that would later carry unbearable irony. He'd been living in the shell of a 3-story building near Leipziger Strasse, sleeping in what used to be someone's kitchen, wrapped in a coat he'd stolen from a dead German officer. The 101st Airborne patch on Morrison's uniform meant nothing to Heinrich. The dog tags, stamped metal rectangles on a beaded chain, looked valuable enough to trade for food. The blood pooling under Morrison's leg meant the man was dying. And dying men, Heinrich had learned, couldn't keep promises. Morrison had been part of a 3-man reconnaissance team sent to locate high-ranking Nazi officers rumored to be hiding in the Soviet sector. The mission was off the books, the kind of operation that would be denied if it went wrong. It went wrong. His teammates were captured or killed. Morrison wasn't sure which. A mortar blast had brought down half a building on top of him, crushing his left leg and trapping him in debris. He'd been there for 6 hours when Heinrich found him. The soldier was 24 years old, a farm boy from Iowa who'd survived the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, where his unit had held a crucial position near Bastogne while German forces tried to break through. That experience had taught him one thing: survival often depended on luck and the kindness of strangers. As Heinrich stared at him with hollow eyes, Morrison made a decision. He pulled the dog tags from around his neck and held them out. In broken German, taught to him by a Belgian woman during the winter, he said 5 words. "Help me. I find you." Heinrich didn't believe him. Adults lied. That was the first rule of war. But Morrison wasn't offering money or food. He was offering something stranger: identification. The tags had Morrison's name, serial number, blood type, and religion stamped into the metal. To Heinrich, they looked official, important. Maybe worth something to the Americans if he could reach their lines. Maybe worth nothing if the Soviets caught him with them. The calculation was simple and brutal. Morrison, as a living person, was a liability weighing 180 pounds. Morrison's tags were 2 ounces of tradable metal. The smart move was obvious. Heinrich reached for the tags. Morrison's hand closed over his wrist, weak but deliberate. The soldier's eyes locked on the boy's face. Then Morrison did something that changed the equation. He split the chain, keeping one tag and pressing the other into Heinrich's palm. "You keep one, I keep one," Morrison said in German. It was a contract. If Heinrich ran, he'd only have half. If Morrison died, same result. The only way both tags had value was if both of them survived. Heinrich made his choice. He started digging the soldier out of the rubble. 3 blocks north, hidden behind what remained of a bakery, was the cellar of his grandfather's butcher shop. The old man had died before the war ended, but the space was still there, underground, stone-walled, with a hidden compartment behind a false shelf where his grandfather used to age meat. Heinrich had been using it as a backup shelter. Now it would become a hiding place for an American soldier in Soviet-controlled Berlin. The journey took 2 hours. Morrison could barely walk. Heinrich wrapped the soldier's arm over his shoulder and half-carried, half-dragged him through empty streets. Twice they heard Soviet patrols and had to freeze in doorways. Once, a patrol passed within 20 feet, 3 soldiers talking in Russian, smoking cigarettes, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Morrison's breathing was loud in Heinrich's ear. The boy covered the soldier's mouth with one hand and held absolutely still until the patrol turned a corner. When they finally reached the cellar, Morrison collapsed on the dirt floor. His leg was badly infected. Heinrich used his grandfather's old knives, still hanging on the wall, to cut away the soldier's pants and examine the wound. Shrapnel was embedded deep in the muscle. Without removing it, Morrison would die of sepsis within days. The surgery happened by candlelight with no anesthesia. Heinrich had watched his grandfather butcher animals for years. He understood anatomy, blood flow, and the importance of clean cuts. Morrison bit down on a leather strap and nodded. The boy worked for 40 minutes, extracting 3 pieces of shrapnel and 1 bullet fragment that had lodged near the bone. Morrison passed out twice from the pain. When it was over, Heinrich used vodka, stolen from a Soviet supply depot 2 weeks earlier, to sterilize the wound and wrapped it with strips torn from his own coat. The soldier survived the night. The next morning, Heinrich faced a new problem: food. Morrison needed protein, water, and rest. The boy had none of these. He left the soldier hidden in the cellar and went hunting. By hunting, I mean stealing. He found a Soviet supply truck parked outside a requisitioned apartment building on Friedrichstrasse. 2 soldiers were loading crates of bread and canned meat. Heinrich waited until they went inside, then slipped to the back of the truck, grabbed a loaf and 2 cans, and ran. A shout followed him. Someone had seen. He ducked into an alley, climbed through a bombed-out window, crossed 3 buildings using interior passages, and emerged 6 blocks away. When he returned to the cellar, Morrison was awake and feverish. Heinrich opened a can of meat with his grandfather's knife and fed the soldier by hand. That was day 1. Over the next 2 days, a strange partnership formed. Morrison taught Heinrich basic English: water, danger, checkpoint, run. The boy taught Morrison the Soviet patrol patterns he'd memorized. Soldiers swept the district every 6 hours, checking buildings methodically, but rarely searching the same place twice in one day. The hidden compartment behind the false shelf became their insurance. If someone entered the cellar, Morrison could slip inside the narrow space, and Heinrich would look like just another homeless child squatting in ruins. The dog tag stayed with them constantly. Heinrich wore his on a string around his neck, hidden under his shirt. Morrison kept his in his pocket. On the 3rd day, Morrison was strong enough to sit up. His fever had broken. The infection was receding. He told Heinrich about Checkpoint Baker, an American-controlled crossing point that had existed 3 blocks west of their current location. Past tense, existed. By the time Heinrich found Morrison, the checkpoint had been moved as Soviet and American forces renegotiated the city's division. Morrison didn't know where the new checkpoint was. Neither did Heinrich. But Morrison knew something else. His unit would be looking for him. Search parties would be sent. He just had to survive long enough to be found. He made Heinrich a second promise, this one more specific. He pulled out a small piece of charcoal and wrote an address on the back of the boy's dog tag: Morrison Farm, Route 2, Cedar Falls, Iowa. "If I make it, you make it," Morrison said. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. The news spread through Berlin like electricity through dead wires. For 3 days, chaos ruled the streets: celebrations, reprisals, confusion as command structures collapsed and reformed. Morrison and Heinrich saw their chance. The soldier could walk now, limping badly but mobile. They planned their escape. Morrison would disguise himself as a wounded German soldier, and Heinrich would play his nephew. The story was simple. They were trying to reach the American sector where Heinrich's uncle could receive medical treatment. It was thin, but it was all they had. They left the cellar at dusk. Soviet checkpoints were everywhere, but the soldiers were distracted, celebrating the surrender with looted alcohol. Morrison had wrapped his leg in fresh bandages, smeared dirt on his face, and covered his uniform with a German civilian coat Heinrich had found. The dog tags were hidden in Heinrich's sock. They approached the first checkpoint on Potsdamer Bridge. A Soviet officer stopped them, young, maybe 22, suspicious eyes scanning Morrison's face. "Where are you going?" he asked in German. Heinrich answered before Morrison could speak. "American sector, my uncle needs a doctor." The officer looked at Morrison's wrapped leg, then at his boots. American boots, standard issue, unmistakable. The officer's hand moved to his rifle. Heinrich's brain worked faster than fear. "Stolen from a dead American," he said flatly. "My uncle took them a week ago. Better than having no shoes." The officer stared at Morrison. Morrison stared back, saying nothing. The moment stretched. Then the officer waved them through. They crossed into the American sector at 9:47 p.m. The American Field Hospital was a converted school building. Morrison collapsed the moment they entered. Medics rushed him to a bed. Heinrich tried to follow, but a military policeman grabbed his arm. "Kid, you can't be here." Heinrich held up the dog tag. "Morrison, Staff Sergeant. He's—" The words failed. His English wasn't good enough. Morrison was already unconscious, surrounded by doctors. They took him to surgery immediately. Heinrich waited outside the building for 3 hours. When a nurse finally came out, she told him the soldier would survive, but needed to be evacuated to a proper hospital in the American zone. They were flying him out in the morning. Heinrich asked if he could come. The nurse shook her head. "Family only." "But I saved his life," Heinrich wanted to say. Instead, he nodded and walked away. The next morning, an ambulance took Morrison to Tempelhof Airport. Heinrich watched from a distance as soldiers loaded the stretcher onto a transport plane. Morrison never woke up. Never saw the boy standing at the fence, holding a dog tag and a charcoal-written address that was already smudging in the rain. The plane took off. Heinrich was alone again. The promise felt like ash in his mouth. All adults lie. The first rule of war still applied. He went back to the ruins of his city, back to scavenging and survival, and tried to forget the American soldier who'd called him kid and pretended they'd both make it. Cedar Falls, Iowa, fall 1945. Morrison woke up in a veterans hospital with a new metal rod in his leg and a memory that wouldn't stop clawing at him. The kid with hollow eyes who'd saved his life. Morrison had been debriefed, decorated, and sent home to Iowa to recover. His leg would never be the same. He walked with a permanent limp, but he was alive because an 11-year-old German boy had chosen mercy over survival. The problem? Morrison didn't know the boy's name. He'd called him Kid the entire time. He didn't know which building they'd hidden in, only that it was near Potsdamer Platz. He didn't even know if the boy was still alive. But he had one clue. He'd given the boy his address, written it on the back of a dog tag. If the boy still had it, if he showed it to the right people, maybe there was a way. Morrison started writing letters, first to the Military Occupation Authority in Berlin, then to the Red Cross, then to aid organizations registering war orphans. He sent the same message over and over. Looking for a German boy, approximately 11 years old, last seen in Berlin near Potsdamer Platz, May 1945. He has my dog tag. His name might be Heinrich. No responses came. Weeks turned into months. Morrison sat at his family's farm, staring at the second dog tag he'd kept, and wondered if promises made in war meant anything once the war was over. Berlin, winter 1945. Heinrich was in an orphanage, not by choice. He'd been rounded up in a sweep of homeless children and placed in a facility run by Allied aid workers. The orphanage was overcrowded, undersupplied, and chaotic. Hundreds of kids, most of them orphaned by the war, all of them scarred. Heinrich kept to himself. He kept Morrison's dog tag hidden in a sock, the charcoal address almost completely faded now, but still barely legible. An American administrator came through in December doing a census, collecting names, ages, looking for surviving family members. When the man asked Heinrich if he had any relatives, the boy said no. Then, on impulse, he pulled out the dog tag. "I know this soldier," Heinrich said in broken English. "He promised." The administrator, a middle-aged man named Robert Chen, took the tag and examined it. Morrison, James A. Staff Sergeant, blood type O, Protestant, and on the back, smudged but readable, Morrison Farm, Route 2, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Chen's expression changed. "Wait here," he said. He went to an office and checked a filing cabinet. 15 minutes later, he returned with a folder. Inside, 7 letters from James Morrison, all asking about a German boy with a dog tag, all dated over the past 6 months. Chen looked at Heinrich. "This soldier has been looking for you." He wrote a telegram that night. It reached Cedar Falls 3 days later. Morrison read it standing in his family's kitchen. "Boy found. Claims you promised. Awaiting instructions." Morrison was on a plane to Berlin within 48 hours. He landed at Tempelhof Airport, the same place he'd been evacuated from 8 months earlier, and went directly to the orphanage. The reunion was quieter than expected. Heinrich didn't cry, didn't run to Morrison, didn't do anything theatrical. He just stood there, 11 years old and 50 pounds lighter than any child should be, and said in careful English, "You came back." Morrison knelt down despite the pain in his leg and showed Heinrich his matching dog tag. "I told you I would." The boy's face didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. For the first time since the war ended, Heinrich let himself believe that not all adults lied. Morrison spent the next 2 weeks navigating bureaucracy. Adopting a German war orphan as a single American soldier was unprecedented. The orphanage director said it was impossible. The military said it was inadvisable. The Red Cross said it raised too many legal questions. Morrison didn't care. He went to his commanding officer and laid out the facts. This boy saved an American serviceman's life under enemy occupation. If that didn't earn him consideration for American gratitude, then what did? The officer made calls. Those calls reached Washington. In February 1946, a special provision was made. Heinrich would be processed as a war refugee under Morrison's sponsorship. The adoption papers were drawn up. On March 3, 1946, Heinrich officially became Heinrich Morrison. The dog tags, both of them, were mounted on a wall in Morrison's family farmhouse. They hung there as a reminder. Some promises are kept, even when it seems impossible. Iowa, 1947. The adjustment was harder than either of them expected. Heinrich struggled with English, with American school, with the overwhelming abundance of a country that hadn't been bombed into rubble. Morrison struggled with his leg, with nightmares from the bulge, with the weight of being a single father to a boy who'd seen too much. But they had something most fathers and sons didn't, a debt that ran both ways. Heinrich had saved Morrison's life. Morrison had kept his promise. That bond, forged in a cellar under Soviet occupation, held them together through the rough patches. The boy learned English by reading farm equipment manuals out loud. Morrison learned patience by watching Heinrich wake up screaming from dreams about air raids. They never talked about Berlin directly, but it was always there between them, a shared trauma that needed no words. Morrison never remarried. People in town asked why, and he'd just say he had his hands full. The truth was simpler. He'd already used his second chance. In 1943, before the war, Morrison had been engaged. His fiancée died in a car accident 3 weeks before the wedding. He'd gone to war carrying that grief like armor. Berlin had cracked it open. Heinrich wasn't a replacement for what Morrison had lost. He was proof that sometimes salvation comes from the least expected places. The boy who'd had every reason to let an American soldier die had chosen mercy instead. That choice had saved them both. New York, 1965. Heinrich Morrison was 31 years old, a successful architect in Manhattan, when the call came. His father was dying. He flew back to Cedar Falls and sat beside Morrison's hospital bed. The old soldier, now 64, worn down by decades of hard farm work and a leg that never fully healed, looked at Heinrich and smiled. "I never told you why I really went back for you," Morrison said. Heinrich leaned closer. His father's voice was weak but clear. "I had a son, before the war. He died in a training accident in 1943. Army Jeep flipped over. He was 19. Heinrich had never known this. Morrison continued, "When you pulled me out of that rubble, when you chose to save me instead of saving yourself, I saw him. Not literally, you didn't look like him, but I saw the same kind of courage, the same kind of impossible goodness that shouldn't exist in a world that cruel." Morrison's hand reached for the dog tags hanging on the wall beside his bed. The nurse had brought them from home. "You weren't charity, kid. You were my second chance at being a father, and you gave me that gift without even knowing it." Morrison died 3 hours later, holding both dog tags in his hand. Heinrich buried him in the Cedar Falls Cemetery with military honors. He kept one dog tag. The other he buried with his father. The weight of what they'd shared, 2 lives saved, 2 wars survived, 2 debts that could never be repaid, hung around Heinrich's neck for the rest of his life.